Your thinking shapes your destiny. Before you can change your life, you must first change the way you think. Every decision you make, every step you take is filtered through your mindset. It's not your circumstances that define you. It's your interpretation of those circumstances that determines your direction. Two people can be given the same opportunity. One sees limitations, the other sees leverage. Why? It's not the opportunity that changed, it's the mindset behind how it was perceived. Thoughts are seeds. Whatever you plant in your mind consistently will grow into beliefs, and those beliefs will eventually manifest as actions. Actions repeated over time become habits, and habits determine outcomes. You cannot escape the law of mental causation. What you dwell on determines what you draw in. What you meditate on molds your movement. If your thoughts are small, your life will shrink to fit them. But if your thoughts are expansive, your life will stretch to accommodate your vision. Too many people are prisoners of their own perspective. They live behind mental bars built from fear, doubt, and old programming. The tragedy isn't that they're in bondage. The tragedy is that the key is in their hands the entire time. The key is thought. Disciplined, intentional, elevated thought. When you shift your thinking, you shift your power. When you elevate your thoughts, your environment eventually has to catch up. Success isn't just about strategy, it starts with state of mind. You can't outperform your self-pemish. If you think you're unworthy, you'll sabotage every win. If you believe you're incapable, you'll decline doors that were meant for you. You don't need more luck, you need more alignment between your thoughts and your purpose. You can only attract on the level that you think. This is why mindset mastery is not optional, it's foundational. The enemy of greatness is not failure, it's small thinking. The kind of thinking that says, I'm too old, or I'm not qualified, or I'll never be that successful. Those thoughts become self-fulfilling prophecies because your subconscious will always work to prove your dominant thoughts right. If you believe you're stuck, you'll never look for the exit. If you believe you're chosen, you'll move like someone with divine backing. Same person, different thoughts, wildly different results. We were never created to live by default. We were designed to live by design. And design begins in the mind. Before anything appears in your hands, it must first be formed in your head. If you can't imagine yourself breaking out of your current level, you'll stay trapped by it. Vision precedes manifestation. The ability to think bigger is the first act of rebellion against mediocrity. When you dare to think differently, you give permission for your future to unfold differently. People often chase tactics without transforming their thinking, which is why they see temporary wins followed by permanent setbacks. You can't slap a new plan on an old paradigm. You must renew the way you think if you want to restructure the way you live. Mental renewal is not an event, it's a process. It's the daily decision to challenge your assumptions, stretch your logic, and align your thoughts with higher principles. Your brain is wired for patterns. Whatever you repeat, it begins to reinforce. This is why intentional thought is so powerful. When you train your mind to focus on what's possible instead of what's probable, it will begin to search for new solutions. When you focus on abundance, you start to see opportunities you were blind to before. When you think in alignment with purpose, your ideas gain energy, direction, and authority. Your mind is a garden and every thought is a seed. You don't have to water every thought that enters. Learn to starve the weeds. Just because a thought shows up doesn't mean it's yours to keep. You have the power to accept or reject. You have the authority to cultivate what serves your vision and uproot what stunts your growth. Most people never step into their destiny because they never master the soil of their mind. The truth is, the external world will always reflect the dominant patterns of your internal world. If there's chaos inside, there will be confusion outside. If there's clarity inside, there will be confidence outside. What's happening around you is almost always a mirror of what's happening within you. So instead of fighting the fruit, start checking the root. Trace it back to how you've been thinking and be honest about it. You cannot conquer what you refuse to confront, and you cannot confront what you cannot identify. Critical self-awareness begins with observing your thoughts without judgment. Not every thought deserves your belief. Some thoughts were planted by fear, by trauma, by society, by people who didn't know your worth. And now those thoughts are masquerading as truth. But you don't have to keep living by someone else's script. You have the authority to rewrite the narrative. Elevating your thinking doesn't mean denying reality. It means deciding which reality you want to dominate. You can't control every event, but you can control the meaning you attach to it. And meaning is what drives emotion. Emotion drives action, and action drives outcome. So when you change how you interpret events, you change how you experience them. And that changes what you do next. People often wonder why the same problems keep repeating in their lives. It's because they never updated their thinking. They keep applying old logic to new seasons. But what got you here won't get you there. You need new thoughts for new levels. You need an upgraded mindset for an upgraded life. Stagnation is often just a sign that your thoughts have plateaued. If your thinking expands, your life must follow. Many are searching for a breakthrough externally, but the real breakthrough begins internally. The moment you realize your thinking has been too limited, too reactive, too fear-based, that's the moment transformation begins. Because now you can interrupt the cycle. Now you can introduce new patterns. Now you can ask better questions. Now you can intentionally build a mental framework that supports your next level. Everything changes when you stop identifying with your limitations and start identifying with your potential. You are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are not your current bank account or broken relationships. You are the architect of what comes next. But architects must first see the design in their minds before they ever build it in reality. If you can see it consistently, you can move toward it confidently. You've been given the divine gift of imagination, not just to fantasize, but to create, not to escape reality, but to reshape it. Imagination is the workshop of critical thinking. It's where you take concepts and possibilities and begin to experiment with the future before it arrives. If your imagination is always consumed with worry and worst-case scenarios, don't be surprised when your life follows that script. But if you train it to visualize power, impact, legacy, your behavior will begin to shift accordingly. A person who knows how to think critically and intentionally cannot be enslaved because their power is internal. They are not swayed by every opinion or distracted by every noise. They move with clarity. They operate with authority. They make decisions not just based on what's popular or easy, but based on what's aligned with who they are becoming. Their thoughts are strategic, not just scattered. There is no limit to what a renewed mind can create. When you discipline your thinking, you become a leader, not just of others, but of yourself. You no longer wait for circumstances to change. You change how you see the circumstances. You create meaning, direction, and momentum. Your thinking becomes your tool, not your trap. Your mind becomes a servant to your mission. Critical thinking is intentional, not automatic. It doesn't happen by accident, and it certainly doesn't happen just because you're educated, intelligent, or experienced. Critical thinking is a discipline, a skill, and a mindset. It is a deliberate act of pausing, questioning, analyzing, and discerning, even when your emotions scream for immediate action. In fact, it thrives in the space between impulse and response. That space, however small, is where power lives. And it's a space most people ignore. Most people don't think, they remember. They repeat. They react. What they call thinking is often just their past programming on autopilot. Something happens, and instead of stepping back to evaluate, they immediately assign meaning based on old habits, past hurts, or other people's perspectives. Their brain defaults to what's familiar, not what's accurate. That's why intentional thinking is so powerful. It breaks you out of mental repetition and gives you authority over your interpretations. Automatic thinking is rooted in assumptions. Assumptions are dangerous because they feel like truth, They rarely get challenged because they operate in the background of your mind, silently shaping your perspective. Critical thinking requires that you bring these assumptions into the light. You ask, is this really true? Where did this belief come from? What evidence supports or challenges this idea? The act of questioning doesn't weaken your position. It strengthens your clarity. Intentional thought requires energy. It's easier to go with the crowd. It's easier to follow headlines. It's easier to believe whatever fits your comfort zone. But ease is not the path to excellence. When you commit to thinking critically, you're choosing to invest mental effort into understanding rather than just reacting. It may be slower at first, but it will save you from a lifetime of misguided decisions and unnecessary setbacks. Critical thinkers are slow to speak and quick to observe. They are not in a rush to prove a point or win an argument. They seek understanding before they seek expression. They don't just hear, they listen for nuance. They read between the lines. They don't accept statements at face value. They ask what's being said, what's not being said. What's the intention behind the words? That kind of listening takes intentional focus. And that focus becomes a filter that protects your decisions from manipulation. When you don't think intentionally, you become vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Marketing campaigns, political rhetoric, social media influencers, all are designed to bypass your reasoning and tap directly into your feelings. If you're not aware, you'll find yourself buying into narratives that don't serve your values or your purpose. Intentional thinking gives you the ability to pause and separate fact from feeling, truth from trend, and principle from popularity. Automatic thinking leads to generalizations. It simplifies complex issues into black and white categories. It says all people who think like this must be wrong, or if it hasn't worked before, it will never work. But critical thinking invites you to explore the gray. It allows for nuance. It challenges you to consider multiple perspectives, even those that make you uncomfortable. That's not weakness, that's maturity. That's intellectual humility. And that's what leads to breakthrough. Intentional thinking is not just for solving problems, it's for preventing them. When you train yourself to think critically, you start identifying faulty patterns before they become costly mistakes. You notice inconsistencies. You sense gaps in logic. You hear warning signs in conversations. You spot blind spots in your own plans. This kind of foresight doesn't come from talent, it comes from discipline. It's the reward for practicing intentional awareness every day. You cannot multitask your way to critical thinking. It requires your full attention. In a world obsessed with speed, distraction, and instant gratification, this is a radical act. But the value of a quiet, focused mind cannot be overstated. When you create space to think, truly think, you begin to access deeper levels of creativity, strategy, and insight. You're no longer regurgitating what you've heard, you're generating original thought. Intentional thinking separates leaders from followers. Leaders don't just act, they think before they act. They consider the long-term consequences, not just short-term applause. They ask, will this decision still make sense 5 years from now? They examine how a choice aligns with their core values, not just their current mood. That kind of thinking requires patience, and patience is the currency of wisdom. Most people want fast answers. Critical thinkers want right answers. You cannot think critically in chaos. If your internal world is cluttered with anxiety, urgency, or unresolved emotion, your thinking will be clouded. This is why intentional thinking often begins with intentional stillness. Silence becomes your strategy. Reflection becomes your reset button. You step away from the noise so you can hear your own reasoning again. This is not avoidance, it's alignment. You're making space to evaluate instead of being swept away by confusion. Intentional thinkers know that every thought has a consequence. A casual belief can become a costly choice. A lazy interpretation can birth a destructive habit. That's why they take time to evaluate what they're thinking before they act on it. They understand that their thoughts are the architects of their future. So instead of being passive recipients of ideas, they become active examiners of every thought that enters their mind. Most breakthroughs don't come from discovering new information. They come from seeing familiar things in a new way. That kind of shift doesn't happen automatically. It happens when you stop coasting and start questioning. When you stop assuming and start analyzing. When you take time to reflect, what am I missing? What angle haven't I considered? Is there another interpretation that brings more clarity or truth? These questions are the tools of transformation. Intentional thinking is not just logical, it's layered. It takes into account facts, feelings, context, and consequences. It's not about being cold and analytical, it's about being thorough and thoughtful. It means being aware of your own cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and blind spots. It means understanding that you don't know everything and being okay with that. Because the goal isn't to be right all the time. The goal is to be wise. The reason many people stay stuck in cycles of dysfunction is because they never learn to think critically about their own beliefs. They protect their patterns instead of interrogating them. They surround themselves with people who echo their assumptions instead of challenge them. Critical thinking invites accountability. It forces you to confront the parts of your mindset that are comfortable but unproductive. That's not easy, but it is necessary. Intentional thought leads to intentional living. When you begin thinking with purpose, you begin moving with purpose. Your decisions have more depth. Your actions have more weight. Your direction becomes more defined. You no longer live reactively, you live strategically. You're not just moving because of pressure, you're moving because of clarity. And clarity comes from carefully crafted thought, not spontaneous emotion. Every intentional thought is a step toward mental mastery. Each time you pause to question instead of react, you strengthen your inner authority. Each time you choose to think deeply rather than respond quickly, you build mental muscles that serve you in every area of life. These muscles make you resilient in crisis, calm in conflict, and confident in chaos. They make you a better leader, a sharper communicator, and a more grounded human being. Intentional thinking is a commitment. It's a choice you make daily to rise above noise, opinion, and impulse. It's not about overthinking or doubting everything. It's about honoring your mind enough to give it room to do what it was designed to do: reason, reflect, and refine. In a world that thrives on speed, critical thinking is your superpower. It slows things down long enough for you to choose wisely, speak truthfully, and act powerfully. Insight is more valuable than information. We live in an age where information is everywhere. Endless feeds, nonstop notifications, constant content. But information alone doesn't change lives. It doesn't build businesses. It doesn't create leaders. It doesn't unlock destiny. Insight is what takes raw data and transforms it into direction. Without insight, you're drowning in facts but starving for wisdom. You know a lot but understand very little. You collect knowledge but make no progress. Because it's not what you know, it's what you understand that matters. The difference between information and insight is the difference between noise and navigation. Information tells you what happened, insight tells you why it matters. Information fills your mind, insight sharpens your mind. You can have the entire internet in your pocket and still be lost in life because information is horizontal, it expands, but insight is vertical, it penetrates. One makes you seem smart, the other makes you wise. One impresses others, the other empowers you. Anyone can access information. It's cheap now. It's available 24/7, but insight costs. Insight requires time, reflection, perspective, and often pain. It requires you to ask deeper questions. It demands that you go beyond surface level observations. It's the reward of those who are willing to sit with truth until it reveals a new angle. Insight is not rushed. It comes through intentional observation and thoughtful interpretation. Many people confuse being informed with being equipped. Just because you know what's trending doesn't mean you know what's transforming. You can memorize statistics, read all the blogs, watch all the tutorials, and still miss the essence of what actually causes change. That's because change is rooted in insight. Insight cuts through confusion, it exposes patterns, it shines a light on what really matters. It makes things click. Insight is what allows someone to say less but mean more. While others are trying to impress with volume, the person with insight speaks with weight. One sentence from someone with insight can be more impactful than an entire lecture filled with scattered facts. Why? Because insight hits the heart. It resonates. It speaks to the core of an issue and offers clarity where there was once only clutter. You can consume information passively, but insight must be pursued. You have to dig for it. Sometimes it hides behind questions you're afraid to ask. Other times it's buried beneath experiences you haven't fully processed. Insight doesn't always come from books or podcasts. It comes from pattern recognition, from evaluating your experiences, from listening to the quiet lessons life has been trying to teach you all along. The person with insight doesn't just remember what happened, they understand the implications. They look for principles, not just events. They don't just say, this failed. They ask, what does this failure reveal about my process, my mindset, or my assumptions? They extract wisdom from experience. They mine every moment for meaning. That's what separates those who grow from those who simply repeat. Information is external. Insight is internal. You can be surrounded by data and still not change. Because real transformation doesn't come from what's around you, it comes from what's happening within you. When something finally clicks, when you finally see what you couldn't see before, that's insight. And with that one shift in understanding, your next steps become clear. You don't just act. You act with intention and confidence. People are not changed by information overload. They're changed by one moment of deep insight. That moment when the light comes on, that moment when confusion turns into clarity, that's the moment everything begins to move. Insight is the catalyst for aligned action. It gives your decisions depth. It gives your plans precision. It brings unity between what you feel, what you know, and what you're about to do. It's possible to have all the right information, but still make the wrong decision. Why? Because you didn't understand the context. Insight gives you the ability to apply the right information to the right situation at the right time. It's the skill of discernment. Without discernment, you might act on facts that don't even apply to your situation. You could be solving the wrong problem. You could be climbing. The insight saves you from wasted effort. Insight doesn't come to the passive. It comes to the present. You have to be fully engaged with your life. You have to pay attention to what's really happening beneath the surface. Insight is born in awareness. When you slow down long enough to reflect, to ask better questions, to examine your beliefs, that's when you're busy trying to consume more, but when you make space to process what you've already received. So people often chase more information because they think more is better. But more isn't better if it just creates more confusion. Insight isn't about volume, it's about vision. It helps you see the connections between ideas, between actions and outcomes, between your current habits and your future harvest. That kind of clarity doesn't come from cramming more facts into your brain. It comes from extracting meaning from what you already know. Insight can change everything in an instant. A single insight about your mindset can break years of stagnation. A single insight about a relationship can restore what looked broken. A single insight in your business can unlock exponential growth. And here's the thing, the insight was often right in front of you the whole time, but until you slowed down and looked with different eyes, you couldn't see it. Insight creates alignment. It aligns your thoughts with your purpose, your actions with your values, your decisions with your destiny. It's what makes things make sense. It's the moment when chaos begins to organize itself into direction. You stop feeling like you're spinning your wheels and start realizing where your energy needs to go. You move from scattered effort to focused execution. You don't need more information to grow. You need more interpretation. You need to take what you already know and ask, what does this really mean for me? What truth is hidden inside this moment? What pattern is emerging here? What is life trying to teach me? That's how insight is born. When you engage with your experiences instead of rushing past them, when you lean into the lesson instead of chasing the next headline. Insight is also the foundation of wisdom. Wisdom is not the accumulation of knowledge, it's the accurate application of truth. Wise people are insightful people. They don't speak the loudest, but when they speak, people listen. They don't act the fastest, but when they act, things move. Because their decisions are not driven by surface level data, they are guided by deep understanding. The world is full of information-rich, insight-poor people. People who know a lot but understand very little. They quote data but can't make a decision. They share opinions but can't offer perspective. That's because they never took the time to internalize what they learned. Insight requires you to digest, not just consume. To meditate, not just memorize. To extract meaning, not just gather material. Insight brings stillness to the storm of information. It centers you, it grounds you, it reminds you of what matters and why it matters. When you live by insight, you're not easily swayed by trends or intimidated by change. You're anchored in a deeper truth, one that you didn't just read about, but one you understand and embody. Because insight is not just something you get, it's something you become. Reflection beats reaction every single time. In a world that rewards speed and instant response, taking the time to reflect seems counterintuitive, even weak. But the truth is, strength is not shown in how fast you respond. It's shown in how well you respond. Reaction is impulse. Reflection is intelligence. Reaction is emotional. Reflection is intentional. Reaction is often about defending ego. Reflection is about discovering truth. When you reflect, you don't just buy time, you buy wisdom. Reaction is easy. Anyone can react. All it takes is a trigger and a little emotion. Someone offends you, you snap, a problem shows up, you panic, a door closes, you quit. That's reaction. It's reflexive, it's primitive. But reflection, that's maturity. That's mastery. That's the moment when you feel the surge of emotion, but don't let it dictate your next move. Instead, you pause, you breathe, you ask better questions. And from that stillness, clarity emerges. Most of the damage people do to their lives doesn't come from what happened to them, it comes from how they reacted. A bad decision in a moment of stress, a hurtful word spoken in anger, a burned bridge because of unchecked emotion. Reactions might feel good in the moment, but they create regrets in the long run. Reflection, on the other hand, gives you space to choose a response that aligns with your values, not just your feeling. There's a difference between motion and progress. Just because you're doing something quickly doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. Reaction loves motion. It loves urgency. It loves to do something now, even when that something is harmful or unproductive. Reflection invites you to consider, is this the right move? What are the consequences of this decision? Does this choice reflect who I am and where I'm going? That space between stimulus and response is where wisdom is formed. Reflection gives you perspective. When you're caught in the moment, everything feels urgent, everything feels personal, everything feels big, but when you step back and reflect, the picture changes. What looked like a crisis may be an opportunity. What felt like an attack may have been a misunderstanding. What seemed like rejection may be redirection. Reaction makes you a prisoner of the moment. Reflection frees you to see the bigger picture. Leaders reflect, followers react. A leader doesn't just respond to what's happening, they interpret why it's happening and how it fits into a larger vision. They don't let emotions steer the ship, they anchor their actions in principle. They understand that a moment of silence can be more powerful than 1,000 words spoken in haste. They know that one well-placed, well-timed decision can shift the entire trajectory of an organization, a relationship, or life. The discipline of reflection is where transformation begins. It's where habits are broken, patterns are revealed, and wisdom is cultivated. You begin to see where your reactions have been running the show. You realize how often you've been letting your emotions sit in the driver's seat. And in that realization, you find power. Because now, you're not at the mercy of the moment, you're in command of your mind. People often confuse quickness with strength, but being reactive isn't strength, it's vulnerability. It means your environment controls you. Your triggers own you. Your circumstances dictate your choices. True strength is restraint. It's knowing you could react, but choosing to reflect instead. It's realizing that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means strategy. It's the space where you shift from being controlled to being in control. Reflection builds emotional intelligence. You start to notice the patterns in your behavior. You ask, why did that bother me so much? What belief is being challenged here? What fear am I trying to protect? These questions don't just help you understand the situation, they help you understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, you can navigate life with clarity instead of confusion. Reaction often comes from unresolved pain. Something happens and it hits an old wound. That wound wasn't healed, just hidden. So it erupts, but reflection gives you a chance to investigate that pain. To ask, where is this coming from? Is this really about this moment, or is this about something deeper? That kind of awareness is what heals. It doesn't erase the pain, but it teaches you how to respond without bleeding on people who didn't cut you. When you react, you hand your power to the problem. But when you reflect, you reclaim it. You choose not to let external circumstances dictate your internal peace. You choose to lead yourself before you try to lead others. You recognize that clarity comes from calm, not chaos. And calm is cultivated in the quiet discipline of reflection, not in the rush to respond. Reflection reveals intention. You can ask yourself, what do I want the outcome to be, instead of how do I feel in this moment? When your actions are based on intention rather than emotion, you start to create outcomes you can be proud of. You begin to move with precision instead of pressure. You make fewer apologies and more progress. You don't just have goals, you start living like someone who's already aligned with them. You cannot lead others well if you cannot reflect deeply, because leadership isn't about charisma, it's about clarity. People don't follow your energy, they follow your example. And if your example is reactive, scattered, and emotionally unstable, it creates chaos in the people around you. But if your example is grounded, thoughtful, and measured, it gives people around you permission to rise to that level of presence and purpose. Some of your greatest lessons will come from what you didn't say, what you didn't do, what you chose to withhold because you had the maturity to reflect. Silence can be strength. Stillness can be strategy. And waiting, when it's guided by reflection, is often where the miracle happens. What looks like inaction is sometimes just alignment in process, because you're not just reacting to life, you're responding to purpose. Reaction is about control, reflection is about clarity. Reaction tries to force things into place, reflection allows you to find your place in what's happening. Reaction fights the fire, reflection sees the fuel. It asks, what am I feeding with my energy right now? And it empowers you to choose whether to pour gasoline or water. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. When you make reflection a habit, you begin to trust yourself more. Not because you're perfect, but because you've learned how to listen to your life. You've trained yourself to observe without judgment, to evaluate without ego, to see without distortion. And that habit of self-awareness becomes a compass you carry everywhere, in business, in relationships, in every challenge and opportunity. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to stop and think. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you're giving yourself space to do it with excellence. Reflection is where preparation and perspective meet. It doesn't delay progress, it deepens it. It strengthens it. It gives you the internal infrastructure to carry the weight of external success. There's a version of you that only emerges when you stop reacting and start reflecting. It's the version of you that responds with wisdom instead of fear. The version that builds instead of breaks. The version that walks in peace even when the world around you is in chaos. That version is already inside you. But it's unlocked not by noise, but by stillness. Not by rush, but by reflection. Challenge the common to create the exceptional. Most people live in the realm of the familiar. They follow routines, obey norms, and settle into patterns that are socially accepted and rarely questioned. But greatness doesn't grow in the soil of sameness. If you want to live an extraordinary life, you must be willing to challenge the ordinary rules that govern average outcomes. The common path leads to common results. To rise above that, you must be willing to ask different questions, think different thoughts, and take different actions. The exceptional never emerges from the comfort zone. The comfort zone is where dreams go to sleep, where potential is buried beneath predictability. People cling to what they know, even if it's mediocre, because the unknown feels threatening. But the truth is, everything great lives on the other side of that fear. The world doesn't reward your safety, it rewards your courage. It doesn't pay for compliance, it pays for innovation. The moment you challenge what's accepted as normal, you begin to shift what's possible. Every breakthrough you admire was once an idea someone was told not to pursue. Every invention, every movement, every leap forward in history started with someone saying, what if we didn't do it the usual way? Challenging the common doesn't mean being rebellious for the sake of attention. It means being intentional about disrupting systems that no longer serve growth, purpose, or truth. It means refusing to let the way things are dictate the way things have to be. Most people don't realize how much of their thinking is inherited, not chosen. They're operating from beliefs that were handed down, absorbed, and never examined. If you never stop to question the origin of your assumptions, you end up living someone else's limitations. To create something exceptional, you have to challenge your default settings. Why do I believe this? Who told me this was the only way? What if the opposite is also true? These questions don't weaken your convictions, they refine them. Challenging the common starts with confronting the stories you tell yourself. Stories like, that's just the way I am, or this is how it's always been done. Those narratives are cages wrapped in convenience. They sound true because they're familiar, but they're not necessarily accurate. The exceptional person is the one who dares to say, maybe I don't have to be that version of myself anymore. That internal shift is where external transformation begins. Creating the exceptional requires being misunderstood. When you step outside the box, people will try to pull you back in, not always out of malice, but out of fear. Your boldness exposes their complacency. Your vision makes them uncomfortable. But the exceptional are not swayed by the opinions of the comfortable. They're guided by the conviction of their calling. They know that ridicule is often the down payment for relevance. There's a cost to challenging the common. It demands more of you. It takes more thought, more effort, more resilience. It's easier to go with the flow. But the flow leads to the average. The stream of mediocrity is wide and well-traveled, but it never reaches the heights of significance. To create the exceptional, you have to swim upstream. You have to go against the grain of convenience and lean into the grit of discipline. When you challenge what's common in your industry, you create disruption. When you challenge what's common in your community, you create influence. When you challenge what's common in your own habits, you create freedom. Every time you raise the standard, you shift what's possible, not just for yourself, but for everyone watching, because the exceptional doesn't just elevate you, it elevates others. It invites people to think bigger, believe stronger, and act bolder. Challenging the common is not just about doing things differently, it's about doing them better. It's not about being unique for the sake of novelty. It's about bringing a level of excellence, insight, and originality that shifts the atmosphere. It's about showing up with so much intention that mediocrity becomes uncomfortable in your presence. You raise the temperature of the room simply by the way you think and operate. It requires that you stop looking for validation in the crowd. The crowd loves the common. The crowd applauds predictability, but the exceptional is rarely celebrated at first. It's criticized, it's doubted, it's ignored until it works. And when it works, everyone wonders how you did it. They don't realize the price you paid in private to challenge what everyone else accepted without question. They see the result. Most people want exceptional results without exceptional thinking. They want the rewards of greatness, but aren't willing to confront the comfort of average. But your results will never rise higher than your level of thinking. If your mind lives in the basement of the ordinary, your outcomes will never reach the penthouse of potential. To elevate your life, you must first elevate your mindset. That starts by rejecting the assumptions that limit your imagination. You have to become a student of contradiction. Study the opposites. Where everyone zigzags, you zag. Where others accept limitations, you challenge them. Where others see risk, you see opportunity. The common mindset avoids failure. The exceptional mindset sees failure as feedback. The common approach chases approval. The exceptional approach seeks alignment. The common way imitates. The exceptional way innovates. Even in your personal life, challenging the common can create extraordinary peace and purpose. Most people accept stress as normal, disconnection as inevitable, and burnout as the price of success. But what if that's all a lie? What if the exceptional life is not more hustle, but more harmony? Not more speed, but more strategy? What if challenging the common means creating space, protecting your values, and defining success on your own terms? You don't need to tear down everything around you to challenge the common. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, not a war, a quiet refusal to settle, a decision to look twice at what others overlook, a commitment to bring more excellence to what others treat as ordinary. The exceptional life is not always loud. Sometimes it's silent, but powerful. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It demands to be respected through results. Challenging the common also means taking full ownership. You stop blaming systems, people, or circumstances. You recognize that exceptional results require exceptional responsibility. You stop waiting for permission and start creating your own opportunities. You stop complaining about what is and begin constructing what could be. That shift in posture moves you from victim to visionary. You begin to study the common, not to imitate it, but to outgrow it. You observe what others are doing, not to compete, but to clarify your difference. The more clearly you understand what's typical, the more intentionally you can pursue what's transformational. You stop asking, what are others doing, and start asking, what does this moment demand from me? That's the mindset that creates movements. The exceptional path is not found, it's forged. It's carved out of daily decisions to refuse average, reject autopilot, and raise the standard. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. It's the posture you bring to everything. You challenge the common in your thoughts, in your words, in your habits, and in your relationships. You no longer allow mediocrity to masquerade as maturity. What once felt impossible becomes inevitable when you stop conforming to the common and start committing to the exceptional. Your life begins to mirror your mindset. Your world begins to shape around your standards. The boundaries that once boxed you in become launch pads. And as you rise, you realize that challenging the common wasn't just about standing out. It was about stepping into who you were created to be. Elevated thinking unlocks elevated living. Everything in your life flows from the quality of your thoughts. The life you're living right now, the results you're seeing, the relationships you're experiencing, the level of peace or frustration you feel, all of it is shaped by what's happening between your ears. You can't live a life that's higher than your mindset. If your thinking is limited, your living will be. If your thinking is defeated, your actions will be weak. But when your thoughts rise, your standards rise, your habits rise, and eventually your life rises, the mind is the gateway to your reality. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. Your perspective becomes your experience. That's why two people can face the same situation and walk away with completely different outcomes. One sees opportunity, the other sees limitation. One sees potential, the other sees pressure. It's not about what's happening around them, it's about what's happening in them. Elevated thinking redefines how you interpret, approach, and respond to life's circumstance. Most people are trying to change their lives without changing their minds. They want new results, but they keep running on old software. They want elevation, but they're weighed down by outdated beliefs, self-imposed ceilings, and fear-based patterns. Elevated living requires upgraded thinking. You can't expect to fly if your thoughts are tied to the ground. You have to cut the cords of doubt, worry, and scarcity if you want to rise. Elevated thinking starts with awareness. You must become aware of the mental loops you've accepted as truth. Every day you have thousands of thoughts, and many of them are unconscious. You don't question them, you just obey them. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough. That's not for people like me. Or this is just the way it is. These thoughts don't reflect truth. They reflect programming. Elevated thinking disrupts that programming and replaces it with possibility. To elevate your thinking, you must become intentional about what you consume. Your thoughts are shaped by what you expose your mind to: conversations, media, environments, and people. If you constantly feed on negativity, gossip, and fear, you will not produce peace, vision, or progress. Elevated thinking is not just about thinking positive, it's about thinking powerfully. It's about choosing thoughts that align with purpose, truth, and growth. Your imagination is one of your greatest tools for elevated thinking. Most people use their imagination against themselves. They imagine worst-case scenarios, rejection, failure, and loss. But imagination was never meant to be your tormentor. It was meant to be your preview. It shows you what's possible before it becomes actual. Elevated thinking trains your imagination to picture success, favor, breakthrough, and abundance, not just as fantasy, but as future. Elevated living isn't about things, it's about state. It's about how you carry yourself, how you approach challenges, how you respond to opportunities. Elevated thinkers don't shrink in the face of difficulty. They see challenges as invitations to grow. They understand that pressure is the birthplace of power. They recognize that how you think in the middle of a storm determines whether you survive it or soar above it. You don't need more money, more time, or more resources to elevate your life. You need a higher level of thinking. Elevated thinking sees beyond excuses. It doesn't ask, what's holding me back? It asks, what can I create from this? It doesn't fixate on obstacles. It focuses on solutions. Elevated thinkers don't wait for conditions to be perfect. They move with what they have, trusting that clarity and provision will meet them on the journey. You can't lead others well if your thinking is small. Small thinking creates a small life. It builds small businesses, small impact, and small influence. Elevated thinking is required to build something that outlives you. It's the kind of thinking that creates legacy. It's the mindset that says, I'm not here to survive, I'm here to transform. That kind of mindset changes how you show up, how you serve, and how you sustain your mission. The people you surround yourself with influence your thinking. If you're always around people who think low, complain often, and dream small, you'll have to fight just to stay neutral. But when you get around elevated thinkers, your standards shift. Conversations become solutions, not gossip. Challenges become games to be won, not reasons to quit. Proximity to greatness elevates your thinking without force. It lifts you by exposure. Elevated thinking is not wishful thinking. It's disciplined thinking. It means training your mind to default to truth, not fear. It means catching your limiting thoughts before they take root. It means questioning your patterns, upgrading your vocabulary, and mastering your internal narrative. Elevated thinking is about mental fitness. It's a daily workout, not a one-time shift. You have to become the gatekeeper of your mind. Everything can't have access to your thoughts. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every voice needs to be entertained. Elevated thinkers don't just protect their time, they protect their mental real estate, because they understand that what gets your attention eventually gets your direction. And what gets your direction shapes your destination. Even your self-talk must be elevated. The way you speak to yourself in private determines how you perform in public. If your internal dialogue is full of doubt, self-sabotage, and criticism, you'll never rise to your potential. Elevated thinking speaks to yourself with clarity, confidence, and compassion. It doesn't ignore your flaws. It speaks to your future. It reminds you of who you are, not just what you've been through. To think on a higher level, you must break free from the approval of the crowd. The crowd thinks in survival mode. The crowd plays it safe. The crowd worships comfort. But elevation requires risk. It requires boldness. It requires being willing to be misunderstood, criticized, or even rejected because you're thinking at a level others haven't reached yet. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. Elevated thinking produces elevated action. When your thoughts rise, your decisions change. You stop settling, you stop delaying, you start moving with intention. Elevated thinkers take ownership.